Welcome, everybody, and welcome today to our inaugural NHCC Educational Committee Roundtable Forum on Cannabis 101. This is where we bring medical professionals together to demystify the health and wellness power of cannabis, to break down the Latinx community's long-held cultural taboos and beliefs on cannabis. So, my name is David Sanchez. I'm a board member of the National Hispanic Cannabis Council, and I also represent Cresco Labs as their Vice President of Product Development. We are here today with our two other co-hosts, Dr. Paloma Leftfield and Dr. Steven Dahmer from Vireo Health. Welcome, guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, so Dr. Paloma Leftfield, MD and MA, is a lifelong cannabis student and advocate who serves as the Senior Director of Clinical Science and Partnerships for Goodness Growth Holdings. Dr. Leftfield brings to Goodness Growth more than 10 years of experience in psychiatric research, community outreach, and teaching. She has expertise in neuroscience with a keen interest in mental health and the endocannabinoid system. At Goodness Growth, Dr. Leftfield is the direct line of communication with providers and organizes outreach events, conferences, continuing education, and lectures for both providers and patients. Paloma is also the chair of the company's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, where she leads the company's expungement efforts across the country. And additionally, Dr. Leftfield vice chairs the National Cannabis Industries Association's Scientific Advisory Committee. She's passionate about the use of cannabis as medicine and cannabis health equity. She looks forward to advocating its healing properties throughout her career.
Thank you, David, so much. And I really want to just give a big, huge shout out to NHCC for having us today. We share the true passion for the medicinal use of cannabis. And a huge shout out to Anthony, the CEO. We've been having conversations now for the last 6 months and have been talking about doing this, and are just so excited to be a part of this amazing organization. So huge thanks to you guys. It is my great pleasure to introduce our other speaker for today, Dr. Steven Dahmer, who is a board certified family physician. His passion for health and healing has taken him around the globe. A fellow of the Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine for over 2 decades, he has studied the relationships between plants and people, working closely with diverse cultures in documenting their use of plants and other integrative therapies. Since 2015, Dr. Dahmer served as the Chief Medical Officer of Goodness Growth Holdings, a physician-founded, patient-focused company dedicated to providing best-in-class manufacturing and clinical utilization of cannabinoid-based therapies. For Vireo Health, he oversees clinical research partnerships, pharmacovigilance, physician outreach, and engagement, and over 600 employees, providing education, support, awareness, and a compassionate patient experience to over 100,000 unique patients utilizing medical cannabis. Dr. Dahmer has given over 200 lectures on cannabinoid-related medical topics and is involved in 2 large-scale clinical trials studying medical cannabis, opioids, and chronic pain. Additionally, Dr. Dahmer is the Assistant Clinical Professor of Family Medicine and Community Health at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai and Director of Holistic Primary Care, practicing integrative medicine in Scarsdale, New York. Dr. Dahmer is joining us from his office today after seeing, I think he said, how many patients, Dr. Dahmer? But thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no, such a pleasure to be here. And this lecture, not to add to a long bio, but I think a couple things that I do want to add. One is I worked throughout med school as a Spanish interpreter. And so for the first hand in Madison, Wisconsin, held that position between a patient and a physician, where language was a barrier. And I served as the interpreter for that. Have worked throughout the Caribbean, Central and South America. And, just to really give a little more credence as to why this lecture is so important for me is my wife is Puerto Rican and 2 children. I am Hungarian by descent, so I call our 2 children Hungarican. And so just such a special lecture for me to reach out to Latino community and to discuss this plant that's near and dear to our heart, cannabis.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Dahmer. And thank you for joining us as well, Paloma. Since this is our first NHCC Educational Committee Roundtable on Cannabis 101, the intent for the session is to provide an informative overview of the differences between THC and CBD. And while I think we'll open up the conversation to a lot broader topics, I think some of our intent today is to help begin to trickle some of this information to our communities and make sure that they have a great source to hear this from, trusted professionals in the industry who know what they're talking about and can have peace of mind knowing that when they come to the NHCC, they know that they're getting accurate information. So I first wanted to say also a couple things about the National Hispanic Cannabis Council. Since our mission is to educate the U.S. Hispanic community on the health, wellness, and economic aspects of cannabis to empower their support and participation in the industry, to help demystify through educational programs such as this, the health and wellness and power of cannabis to break down long-held cultural taboos and beliefs on cannabis. This is super important for our communities and really trying to rid away from some of these stigmas that are holding down the plant, the medicine, the therapeutics and its applications are so very important to remove so that our communities have access to these same tools. So with that, guys, let's begin the show.
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
David, let's start with you and ask you some questions about some of the major misconceptions about cannabis with the Latinx community.
Sure. What are the major misconceptions around cannabis with Latinos? So, well, there are actually many, but most reliably, educational information on the health and wellness and power of cannabis, information to demystify the power of the cannabis plant to break down long-held cultural taboos and beliefs on cannabis. I think some of the major misconceptions around cannabis with Latinos is the negative connotations that come with it. Either it's with drug trafficking or inebriation. It could also be a very strong held association to laziness or just like someone who wants to rid every aspect of their future. And I think that that's not necessarily true. And I think that everything in the world has its moderation and its application. And so cannabis is just very closely tied and associated with those negative connotations within the Latinx community. And so I think it's important to start to get rid of some of those misconceptions and really try to educate the masses on the effects and the power that the cannabis plant can have and the quality of life that it can really bring and introduce into someone's daily routine. And I think that a lot of people find that, number one, it's a plant that grows from the earth, is from the earth, and that our bodies actually have a biological system that helps regulate our body using cannabinoids and the active ingredients found in cannabis. But there's also other misconceptions such as, you know, it may be addictive, right? I think that's also one thing that is also very negatively portrayed is that it has a very high probability of addiction. I think that that's frankly just not true. And I think some of the best science will help us to demystify some of those things.
Yep, Paloma, I just want to jump in too, and David, just to add to that, I think, all communities have been kind of fed or spoon-fed the negative side of this plant. And I'll speak even personally as a physician that studied medicinal plants around the globe. When I was first approached with this idea of cannabis as a medicine, I said, no, that everything that I had learned went against that. And even as a country, we've spent near $1 billion studying the negative impacts of this plant, and we've seen the negative impacts in community of the illegal trade of this plant. But no one has ever spoken to us previously about positive impacts, and that's what we're looking to discuss a little bit more. And I would say that's even what I call a double whammy. The Latino community has been targeted, utilizing cannabis as a tool to incarcerate Latinos in the past. And so there are 101 reasons for that stigma to exist. And so we have a lot of work in working against that, but that's some of the things that we'd like to share tonight.
And that's what we're trying to do here, really combat that stigma that has been such an integral part, unfortunately, of our country's history, beginning with the 1910 Mexican Revolution, which is really when we first, as Americans, saw the recreational use of cannabis in the United States. And from there, unfortunately, we have an incredibly sordid past based on that xenophobia that we were experiencing as a culture. And kind of along those lines, David, kind of going to the next bucket is, why do you feel that the Hispanic community can be so resistant toward the plan? And I know we've touched on this a little bit, but I want to stay here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Hispanic community has a resistance and a reluctance towards the plant solely because of misinformation and the lack thereof. I think that when people don't have the accurate information that they need to make their own assessment and their own judgment, then they rely on assumptions, or they rely what they've heard in the media, or maybe what their neighbor told them. And that neighbor is also getting their information from the same inaccurate source, or the same kind of story is being told to them. And so I think that specifically in the Latin community, that has matriculated into a very, very large taboo that almost puts it into a place where nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's swept under the rug. It's kept behind closed doors. It's something that, you never bring up to the dinner table, or et cetera, with family. And I think that it's almost only seen as a very, very last resort type of thing when people want to start seeking that information, and when they want to go get some of that help. Something that we really needed to tackle is, like, we don't have to wait till those dire moments of finding or wanting to find relief, or wanting to find accurate information, to really go seek that out. And I think this is part of what the NHCC wants to bring front and center to the table is, here's a resource. You might not need it today, or you might just be interested, and here's a great place to get that information.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, absolutely. It shouldn't, and you said something there, it should not be the last resort here for healthcare providers, which is why the education that NHCC provides is so imperative to really bring cannabis to the spotlight. I mean, cannabis is for something called intractable pain, when they don't know how to treat the pain, when it's really the last thing that we can use as healthcare providers, when in fact it should really be one of the first line treatments. We're talking about side effects, but unfortunately, the only way to combat, or fortunately, actually, the only way to really combat stigma is through this education that NHCC is providing. Along those lines, David, do you feel that there needs to be more education in Spanish specifically in order to engage more with the Hispanic community?
Absolutely. Part of the issue is that some of the finite information that is out there might not be in the language that our community needs it to be. And we need to do a better job of meeting the community where they're at, in their language, on their home turf, on their block, so to speak. And this really, really comes down to getting it into a language and in a digestible format. I think our community are very visual learners, and love testimonials, and love seeing the properties and the efficacy that it can have through word of mouth. I think some of that in our community is held very, very true. And it's like that word of mouth is oh so important. And I think in order to really start getting the masses behind it, we need to have a great source of information in that language where the community's at. It's so important.
Absolutely. And shifting gears now to what we've been talking about, education and science, we're speaking with a true expert who studied ethnobotany, medicine, integrative medicine, and really can talk about this from a real expert point of view. You know, when Tony and I were talking about bringing this education to NHCC, our first thoughts were really having this be a series. So this is really going to be a public service announcement from someone who's really studied the safety and efficacy of the plant. So with that being said, let's turn it over to Dr. Steven Dahmer and just ask what are cannabinoids?
Great. Yeah. And before we even jump into that, I just want to mention as well, too, that for me, a tremendous debt to Latino community, even influencing me as a physician to embrace plant medicine. And one of the many lessons that I learned in my travels is, I truly believe that plant medicine has a softer impact on our physiology. I think it's something that's tolerated better by us as human beings due to this thousands of years of coevolution together. For those Dominicans on the call, los Dominicanos, I studied at Pucamaima. I remember late night after stressful days, Abuela Dulce used to make té de manzanilla. And we had it every night before I'd go to bed to calm down. And we know that chamomile or manzanilla interacts with those same benzodiazepine receptors, that benzodiazepines can be very dangerous medications when used incorrectly. That té de manzanilla can work with our physiology very effectively without those dangers. And just a simple example of the utilization of plant medicine, which is why I think too that despite all this stigma, I see even cannabis alongside many other plant medicines as embraced by the Latino community. And to answer your question, Dr. Paloma, cannabinoids are, one of many constituents, right? One of many chemicals within this plant that have a physiologic impact, that impact our body through a system that's already in our body we call the endocannabinoid system. And these cannabinoids, THC and CBD, are the most prevalent, right? The two most common cannabinoids. But there are estimates that we're nearing 100 different cannabinoids, right? And these numbers are changing constantly that exist in this plant. And we're not going to find anywhere else that impact this system that, in a nutshell, oversees our body's ability to balance. And for me, that's what health is. Health is about whether we get a virus, or heaven forbid cancer, or any of the diseases I often see and treat as a physician, it's our ability to come back to that balance point. So these cannabinoids within the plant really help the body come back to that balance point when used correctly.
I love, yeah, that idea of balance is so important in our bodies. And again, just to reiterate what Dr. Dahmer is saying, Dr. Dahmer wasn't taught about this in his medical school training. A very small amount of physicians are, which is why it's so important that we really are filling in these gaps. Just talking more about how cannabinoids function and maybe exactly what they are. Can we talk about different types of cannabinoids and how they communicate in our bodies?
Absolutely. Let's jump right in there and discuss THC, right? And THC, hopefully the majority of the listeners out there have heard of THC. THC is the cannabinoid, the most prevalent in the plant, but which can be associated with getting high or intoxication. And it has gotten that kind of negative rap or that negative vision due to this ability of getting someone high. And let's all be honest, we've all seen someone that has even smoked too much or been intoxicated from the plant, and it's not a great sight. It's not something that we would yearn for or look to for a medicine. One of the biggest revelations about THC is that the numbers have increased in what you're going to find on the street. So that marijuana that you find on the street is going to be very, very potent in THC. But what we're revealing from the scientific studies is that even small doses of THC where you won't have that impact of being high or intoxicated or being off, however we want to call that, can have those beneficial effects. And the beneficial effects of THC that have been studied include pain relief. One of the first and foremost that we're studying at Vireo Health in conjunction with Albert Einstein, 2 large-scale clinical trials. But also muscle spasms. So in terms of relieving muscle spasms, those with nausea and vomiting, specifically related sometimes to cancer therapy. It's the THC which has been studied the most for that. And really the THC is the best studied molecule in terms of those medicinal benefits. But just like any medicine, we have to be very careful about dose. And there's a famous statement in medicine by Paracelsus that the dose makes the poison. If we go too high, that's what can trigger the negative effects. And the vast majority, and Paloma, Dr. Paloma, you mentioned those 100,000 patients we've served. Of those patients coming through the door, want that lowest effective dose of THC that can provide the pain relief, that can help with the nausea and vomiting, that can relax the muscle without the intoxication. David, you're the expert on cannabinoids as well. Maybe you have something to add there.
No, I think you hit on a lot of great points there. I think that a lot of the best science, as you mentioned, is only available on THC and CBD in some fashion. And I think also, as you mentioned, the plant has 100 plus cannabinoids. It has 400 plus total compounds, and it's. I think sometimes that's why it's called the miracle plant or the cure-all plant. It really does have the potential to modulate, regulate a lot of our bodily functions that are regulated by our ECS system. And so I think that we need to spend more time, more energy, more research on finding that appropriate dose. Doctors, you said the dose makes the poison, and I couldn't agree more. And it's almost like the cart before the horse. And some of the products that we're seeing in market today have some little to no research behind them, and I think it's very important that the industry takes all of these compounds with great responsibility. And I think that in order to find that great dose and in order to find that therapeutic level of concentration, we're going to need more time with these cannabinoids and more research behind these projects. Absolutely.
Well, and I think to that point, David, and this might be a little bit of a digression, but I think it's very important for everyone, now that we have these state legal programs, one, we don't have to hide in the shadows. And that means that we can have a product that's third-party tested and that's trusted, that really has what it states that it has in it. And, at our dispensaries, many of them, you can meet with a licensed pharmacist. You can work with those that truly have the background and the education to really confirm and try to ensure that you get that right product and right dose, and even other aspects that it doesn't interact with other medications, or to minimize any negative impact that any medication might have, as pharmacists do with all drugs.
Absolutely.
And one more thing that I'll say is that the cultivation practices, the cultivation techniques, the genetics that are coming out of the innovational efforts from a lot of the companies or just from the industry altogether are getting more and more dialed in. And just how traditionally and historically certain operators were breeding for high THC plants. Similarly, now in where we are today, cultivators are breeding for CBN, they're breeding for CBG, and trying to dial in the plant and trying to get that biosynthesis in the plant to really lend to those concentrations so that the research does have quality ingredients going into these studies and quality trials being conducted, knowing that they're getting quality cannabis, quality cannabinoids, and are able to formulate in an appropriate way. And I think that we'll start to see a lot more of this research. Number one, being active, two, being funded, and three, really getting products and science to the market. Part of that research is one, to create the application, but two, to educate and to learn from trial and error, from different kinds of studies that we may see. And I think that there's already a lot of traction in the industry. I know CU Boulder is definitely paving the way. Northwestern University in Chicago is also paving the way. There's more and more scholarly and recognized institutions trying to put the dollars behind this medicine, and I think it's oh so important.
Well, let me toot our own horn for 1 second. And we have an ongoing research, a clinical trial listed on clinicaltrials.gov, where they should be listed, where we are actually a randomized double-blind control trial looking at a higher THC formula versus a 1-to-1, so equal combination of THC and CBD versus a higher CBD formula versus a placebo, right, a sugar pill, to really see which one and at what dose is potentially helping patients with chronic pain the most. And before we move on, maybe Dr. Paloma or David, let's touch on CBD, just for the audience as well, the other major cannabinoid.
Yeah, I love CBD as from my background in mental health. And, you know, the number one qualifying condition in most medical cannabis states is chronic pain, which is what most of our research is focused on. But right now, the number two, and it's really having an uptick, is post-traumatic stress disorder, followed very closely behind by anxiety, in which anxiety is one of the qualifying conditions. And cannabidiol is very different from THC. It doesn't have those traditional intoxicating effects, but it's been studied by the FDA and is actually marketed as an FDA-approved drug called Epidiolex, which works in 3 different pediatric epileptic conditions. But also, more importantly, from the mental health perspective, is that now people that have had COVID, 1 in 3 people that had COVID suffer from a new onset mental health condition. And that means that it's an epidemic on top of an epidemic that we're already experiencing. And unfortunately, many of the pharmaceuticals used to treat mental health conditions, ranging from depression to PTSD, have a bevy of side effects associated with them. SSRIs are wonderful for many different people, but they don't work for everyone. And the side effects, again, are incredibly detrimental compared to cannabidiol. And a lot of the research that we've been reading, unfortunately, is not in the United States on the treatment of mental health conditions, but are in Kyoto and Israel. But they're applicable, and they show that cannabidiol performs almost as well, if not just as well, as traditional pharmaceutical agents used to treat this. And that's just so promising, especially as we're seeing such an uptick in people that are really suffering right now. So cannabidiol with THC, they're the 2 major cannabinoids, but just a huge fan of both. And that's what Dr. Dahmer and David were talking about, having the different ratios and really bringing this plant that has, you know, some say over 1,000 molecules in the plant, the different combinations and how nuanced it is to really treat so many different conditions. Truly amazing.
Yeah, I do want to just a quick mention that, you know, it is, we're seeing, I used to, in my lectures, ask who heard of CBD, and 5 years ago, no hand would go up. And now I ask that, and everybody's hand goes up maybe twice. And we see CBD on the corners, in the corner store, and we have to be very careful in terms of buyer beware. Even studies have shown that, you know, the CBD that you might find on the corner, although the price is cheap, it may not be that best quality. And again, the package that it comes in, meaning is it from a whole plant source, or what other cannabinoids, terpenes, and other ingredients are in there, are very important. So just a note to buyer beware, make sure that you're getting good quality, even CBD product if you're buying over the counter.
Yeah, David, maybe you can touch more on really the importance of buying your cannabis product, even CBD, from a reputable source, from somewhere that's third-party tested, like Cresco.
Absolutely. So, you know, getting access is super important, and having access to quality medicine and quality products is of the utmost importance. Not only does it bring the efficacy that you're looking for and that you desire, but number 2, you have that peace of mind that you're not going to get any bad quality product, you're not going to get side effects that you didn't intend for, and that you're going to hit the right dose that you were also looking for. And so buying it from a reliable source, from a trusted vendor, and somebody who goes through the regulatory framework of getting these products into the market is imperative for consumer safety. And I say this because these products are held through very, very high scrutiny of testing and regulation. And so specifically, the products that you'll find at a licensed dispensary absolutely have to be tracked from seed to sale. So we know the operator, we know where they do business in, how they grow their plants. There's visibility on how the operation is getting that plant all the way to harvest. And that seed to sale program really allows for the plant to start from a seed, mature to a plant, and either get processed into a high quality oil, which then could get formulated into a product. Knowing that original source is a high key to that reliability. The second piece that it really provides is that because it goes through these testing channels and through these regulatory requirements of potency, residual solvent, microbiological activity, filth and foreign, et cetera, you can really start to get that peace of mind that the formulation was conducted appropriately. That the fact that the quality checks came back and someone signing off on the potency, and that your variability between that dose is gonna hit the specification that's on the package, and you can really trust that product. And the great thing of buying that product from a licensed dispensary is that you know that it was a third party who tested this product. It wasn't the company who really just wants to push their product. And I think that sometimes that's what is missing with those products that you'll see at the gas station, or that product that you see that's not in a regulated dispensary, is oftentimes those products aren't held to that same scrutiny and don't have those same requirements by a third party to get tested and ensure that there's not going to be any side effects or any bad activity with that product.
Absolutely. So we've gone from our third-party tested seed. Now we're at the sale in our dispensaries. So Dr. Dahmer, we've talked about THC and CBD. Can you talk about the different ways that we can consume these products?
Yeah, I think this is a really important point, because one of my pet peeves being in this industry for a while is anytime we see a media article or anything about cannabis, there's usually somebody with a big joint and a big puff of smoke. And I think that's enough to scare, many people away from these programs. And what we don't realize is that the vast array of different delivery forms that exist to help someone find that right product. And that can go from an inhaled form, right? The majority is usually vaporizers, although we're seeing much more commonly even vaporized flower, but to tablets, soft gels, right? Very similar to medications that we're used to. Some patients, especially end of life care, will prefer even a small part of a cookie or potentially a gummy. Is, I'm so tired of taking pills, I'd like something else. One delivery form that's really increasing in popularity are topicals, and these can be used in conjunction, right? Some patients might take an oral form, but then use a topical in an area that is very painful. If I'm treating specifically arthritis or a joint pain of a specific area, we're finding the topical forms increasing in popularity. There are even suppositories, right? Rectal suppositories, but just a quick glimpse of how many different delivery forms can be utilized. That is not a big joint with a puff of smoke. And that's really the last direction that we're going to in these medical programs. What did I miss,
Yeah,
Dr. Palma? David, what did I miss?
no, I don't think you missed anything. I think you hit all the applications that I could think of. I think you said a good point that kind of brings us back to our initial point of the misconceptions and why we have this taboo in our community. And I think that big joint of combustion and smoke and the aroma that it produces is part of that taboo. And when you bring up marijuana, it's almost like you can instantly smell it with the people that you're talking to. And that picture, as you said, of the big joint, of the combustion, of someone inhaling, maybe smelling a certain way, is part of that taboo. And to your other point, there's many ways of consumption. There's plenty of swallowable tablets. There's plenty of those capsules and tinctures that have no association with combustion. And I think that's important for people to know and get more education on.
Absolutely. And I just want to thank you both so much for this amazing talk today. I don't know how many times we said stigma, how many times we said education, but so happy that we're using this education through Anthony Valdez, through NHCC, to really break this stigma. It's imperative that this is just one small step towards really normalizing this plant that's we've seen firsthand, you know, in our careers and in our history as a human race, really be such a healing power. And I couldn't be again more thankful to David Sanchez and Steven Dahmer, Dr. Steven Dahmer. If you guys have any closing words before we sign off, happy to hear it. David, starting with you.
No, I just wanted to echo the thank you. Number one, for the opportunity, but two, for getting us together and getting the forum started. I think it's, you know, we may not have all the answers today, but I think certainly chipping away at the challenge ahead of us is a great way to start. And you know, I commend these efforts, and I'm so happy and appreciative to be a part of it.
I'll echo that. Such a pleasure to be a part of this, and you know, it is really about education, and that is the best approach to looking at stigma. And I say this over and over in the lectures. You know, let's strip away that stigma and look at this from an objective standpoint. And I encourage everyone that's listening to do that. Let's think of this like other plant medicines, and realize how much kind of baggage we are bringing to the table. What of that is realistic, and what might we open the door to a new way of looking at this plant. And un placer estar aquí esta noche, and I'm excited for more education to come in the future, and just really want to thank Anthony, NHCC, David, Dr. Paloma for this opportunity.
All right, and signing off, you can find more about the National Hispanic Cannabis Council at NHCC, NHCcouncil.org. Look forward to connecting with everyone. Signing off. Thank you.
Guys.